Okay. It's 1:30, or how do you say it in English? 1:30. So we're starting now. And we've been borrowed this fancy hybrid meeting device. I hope it works. Because Ian, we can't see yet, but we will see later. I hope you hear us and please speak up if you can. So, welcome everybody to a seminar called Social Norms and Behaviors in a Car-Centric Society. Today we'll be hearing about and discussing how a society designed with a private car in the center is shaping social norms and behaviors. Why these social norms and behaviors are problematic and what can be done to affect change. The seminar starts with me giving a short introduction to the framing of the day, a car-centric society. What is that? And then we'll listen to a presentation by Professor Ian Walker, who is joining us virtually on this screen. And I'm very excited to have him here with us. And then we'll have a discussion with Professor Ian Walker and our guest behavior strategist, Ida Lemoine. And I encourage you in the room to be active and share your reflections and questions as we go along. And just for information, this seminar is being recorded. We have this device, but also a camera over there, the phone. And we plan to upload this recording to our YouTube channel afterwards. My name is Ludwig van Welden. I'm a member of the board of the NGO Gröna Lister that hosts this seminar. I'm an engineer within the field of sustainable urban planning and transportation. Professor Ian Walker is a renowned environmental psychologist who specializes in psychology and behavior in the areas of transport, energy, and water. He is perhaps best known to us, at least, for his contributions to understanding motonormativity, a term that he uses and his colleagues use to describe the societal bias that prioritizes car-centric policies and behaviors. And his research challenges us to think differently about the transportation system and how cultural norms shape our choices and attitudes. Our second panelist is Ida Lemoine, who is the CEO and a behavioral strategist at the company Beteendelabet. She's right here with us today. Can't wait. It's a small room so everyone can see. And apart from working with transportation, it has been doing amazing work in the food world, especially when it comes to shifting habits around meat consumption, what some might call köttnormen or meat normativity in Sweden. She has experience using creative methods like prototyping and targeting people who are most open to change to spark new behavior and challenge norms. And I can't wait to hear her take on what the transportation sector can learn from food habits. Here's a picture that tries to illustrate what a car-centric society is, and it's a society that is planned for private car use, where different facilities and societal functions are spread out spatially and connected with infrastructure that is designed for high-speed traveling. It's an urban planning paradigm that has been undertaken in Sweden and in many other countries in the world since the mid-1900s. And so as long as the majority of people can remember, the car has been the dominant mode of transportation here in Sweden. The planning paradigm has in many cities looked a bit like this, where new wide roads and highways have been rolled out by traffic engineers to increase traffic capacity and traffic flow. And with the car-centric planning paradigm, the private car becomes a social norm. And in Sweden we even have saying Villa, Volvo, Vove, which in English is like single family house, Volvo car and dog. And that in a jokeful manner I would say that describes the stable life in the Swedish welfare society, something to strive for. Subsequently, people own cars in Sweden. There's almost half a car per person, and travel behaviors follow, as trips in Sweden oftentimes are made by cars. and even short ones, I could add. So what we see is a feedback loop where infrastructure, social norms, and behaviors keep reinforcing each other. And there are many consequences of a car-centric society. Just to name a few ones quickly, we now have more parking space than living space in Sweden. And infrastructure with hard surfaces that is purpose-built for motorized vehicles isn't very beneficial when it comes to dealing with extreme weather, which is expected to be more prevalent due to climate change, of course. And another challenge of our time is that we have an epidemic of physical inactivity, and for which the car-centric society is doing no good. And of course, there are injuries in traffic and traffic accidents. Around 200 people per year in Sweden die in traffic-related accidents, and between 20 and 30 of them are being påkörningsolyckor, which is a pedestrian being run over by a car every year. And there are some bit more invisible externalities from this car-centric society. And this image shows the emissions of PM10 particles, which is an air pollutant which comes from the roadways and the vehicles driving on them. So apparently there is a need to shift how we prioritize in the transportation system. And we do see in strategic documents from cities all over the world that transportation modes with higher capacity than cars are being promoted, such as walking, cycling, and public transport. But this type of system transformation, it needs plenty of work in several different aspects of transportation sectors simultaneously. And today we're focusing on the social norms and the behaviors and how we can use our knowledge about them to balance out this reinforcing feedback loop that I was mentioning before. And of course there are plenty of other aspects as well, but this is our focus today. So it's simplified, of course. And with that, this introduction, I would like to give the virtual floor to Professor Neil Walker, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Hello Ian, how are you doing today? And then I'll stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you so much, Ludwig. Thank you, everybody. It's very, very nice to be invited to be here today. So thank you so much for the invitation today. I'm very sorry I'm doing this in English. I didn't have time to learn Swedish in time. So I'm going to talk very quickly about some work we've done on exactly those issues that Ludwig has just introduced. Why is it so hard to change people's travel? And what is the role of the environment in shaping those behaviours and people's perceptions of what's normal? So this is a little bit of a reminder of why motoring is a big public health issue. Ludwig just alluded to a lot of this. There's collisions and direct injury from people crashing cars, but there's a lot of indirect problems. So there is noise pollution, which creates heart disease. There is air pollution, which creates diabetes and Alzheimer's and dementia. And then there's all the health problems that arise from physical inactivity, from over-reliance on cars and not walking and cycling for these short journeys that we make every day. There's also a whole load of other problems that arise. So the more that our society relies on driving, the more we disadvantage people who don't have much money, or the more we cut through communities with roads and make it hard for people to have social contact. So too much driving causes a lot of different problems. We've suggested that one of the big challenges is this phenomenon that we call motor normativity, a cultural problem where we all collectively struggle to see the problems of motoring, where we all find it difficult to recognize what the problems are and to even see the problems that emerge from motoring. because we find it difficult to see the problems of motoring, this means we tend to be very bad at addressing the problems. We tend to lack ambition. We tend to accept law breaking because we see it as just inevitable. We accept pollution because we see it as inevitable. And we don't take obvious actions to try to reduce the harms that come from motoring. I've got a couple of photographs just to show you some of the examples of what this looks like in the real world. So this is a sign from Britain where we ask criminals politely not to break the law, as long as they are breaking the law with a car. We don't do this for other crimes. We don't ask burglars to politely, we don't say, please do not burgle houses, please do not steal money. We don't do those things, but we ask nicely when it's motorists because we see law breaking as so normal that it's treated specially. This is a very interesting case. This is a historic village that is owned by a charity. The entire village is owned by a charity, and they go to enormous effort to make the village look historic. So all of those houses have to remain looking exactly the way they did 100 years ago, but you can leave any old car in front of it, and that apparently has no visual impact whatsoever. So people see the houses, they see whether the houses look historic, but they do not see whether the street and the space between the houses looks historic. Those cars are just invisible to people. This is a really interesting current question. If we adopt electric vehicles, where do we put the charging infrastructure? And one of the things that has immediately started to happen is we are taking space from pedestrians to put the vehicle charging infrastructure in. And I'd suggest that one of the reasons that happens is that people who travel a lot by car, they see all the space at the side of the road as just empty, dead space that obviously needs to be handed over for the benefits of motorists. And probably one of the biggest illustrations of the problems is pedestrian crossings. Who waits? Who has to stop and wait? And who gets the green light by default? The fact that we always give the green light to cars and we don't give the green light to pedestrians tells us something critical about the way we view our streets and the way we view our public spaces and what we value and what we don't value. So we wanted to test this. We wanted to measure experimentally, can you show evidence that people have these double standards, that people view driving differently to everything else? So we created these questions where we had pairs of questions with one or two words difference. So for example, we had some people got the question, do you agree people shouldn't drive in populated areas where other people have to breathe in the car fumes? And other people got the same question, but with two words changed. Do you agree people shouldn't smoke in populated areas where other people have to breathe the cigarette fumes? So we got 2,000 people, and 1,000 people got the car questions, and 1,000 people got the non-car questions. And here's just a couple of examples of what we saw. If you leave your car in the street and it gets stolen, should the police act? Well, clearly people agree. People think if you leave your car in the street and it gets stolen, this is very serious and the police need to do something about it. But if you leave your belongings in the street and your belongings get stolen, then the public have a very different view on this. So clearly the car is treated as a special case. And we found this in lots of these different questions. If people judged the car version or the driving version, they were applying different standards. This was the clearest one of all. It's the question I just showed you. Do you agree that people shouldn't drive where other people have to breathe in the car fumes? Then most people disagree with that, and only a small number agree that you shouldn't make people breathe your car fumes, but 3/4 of people agree that you shouldn't make people breathe cigarette fumes. Now, fumes are fumes, and toxic smoke is toxic smoke, and it shouldn't actually matter where it comes from. But in this question, and in all the questions we asked, people were giving special consideration to the car. The car always got treated as a special case that was different from everything else. Two interesting points about this is because this research got quite a bit of attention, some other researchers replicated it. So there was another study in the United Kingdom that did the same thing and found the same results. And then a study in America very recently did the same work in America and found the same results. The British study also included a new question, which was it compared, is it okay for people to play loud music in public where it disturbs other people versus is it okay for people to drive loud cars in public where they disturb other people? And again, it showed the same thing. The car was treated as special. The public agreed that you should not play loud music if it disturbs other people, but you can drive a loud car if it disturbs other people. So again, the car is always special. And one of the really important things that came out of all these studies is that we tended to see that people who had a car and people who did not have a car tended to give the same answers. So this was really important. The fact that people who did not drive cars also gave special consideration to cars was potentially telling us something interesting. This wasn't just people making excuses for themselves. This was something deeper. This was something cultural, where it's like everybody has agreed that the car has to be treated as a special case. And to explain that, we we used this, what's called the social ecological framework, to basically say, there's a person in the middle. There's you in the middle, in that green rectangle. And we say that person, throughout their entire life, is exposed to lots of different environmental influences, all of which push this message that cars are important. So if we look at our friends and family, we learn how to travel from our friends and family when we're children. Our parents tell us that we have to stand at the side of the road and wait for cars until to stay safe. Our parents teach us that cars are more important than people. We sit in the back of cars when we're children, learning to drive by watching our parents in the front seats. We then, every single day, we observe other people. Every day, we go outside our homes and we see law breaking and inconsiderate driving and space prioritizing motoring over people. We also then have a physical world, an infrastructure world that makes driving easier than walking or cycling. We have priority given to cars over pedestrians. And the nature of our street design sends the message that driving is more important. And then that happens within a cultural environment where, as a culture, in our media and our news and our discourses, we promote driving as being important and we downplay the harms that come from it. And so what we're suggesting is that all of these different environments, your social environment, your physical environment, your cultural environment, they all tell you every single day of your entire life, all of these environments are sending the same message, which is that driving is important, driving is special, and we shouldn't question the problems that arise from it. And so our big claim is this: because our multiple environments tell us over and over again that driving is special and that the harms are not important, we don't only see it as proper, and so we don't only see this as normal, we see it as correct. That because all of our environments send this message that driving is special and important. And it's the right way for the world to be organized. And we'd suggest that this is one of the reasons it is so difficult to create change, that people believe that today's arrangement is correct, not just normal, but correct. And so they resist change because they see this as the proper way for the world to be organized. Very recently, I've got some brand new data which I can share with you. So we've just done a new test to evaluate these environmental influences. So again, we took 2,000 people from the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Netherlands to get a more cycling culture. And we had people measure pairs of items, and that let us do these scores from -6 to +6. High scores suggested motor normativity or pro-car biases, and so on. Let me show you a couple of bits of data. Now, these are quite complicated looking things, but I'll explain what they mean. So this is the first one. This is very, very interesting for what it tells us about social norms. And I think there's a really positive message here encouraging non-car travel. So what these numbers show, if you can see, like up at the very top left, for example, we've got 24%, 51%, 25%. What that tells us is, in the United Kingdom, 51% of people think that they support driving the same as their friends and family. 24% think they support driving less than their friends and family, and 25% think they support driving more than their friends and family. So it's kind of balanced on driving. When it comes to driving, people sort of share the same view as their friends and family, and they tend to think that their friends and family have the same view as they do. If you look down, own support versus public support, it's very similar. People tend to think that their view of driving is the same as the public's view of driving. Go down, look at the fifth and the sixth one. This is people's support for not driving. This is people's support for traveling without a car. And what you can see, 66% of people think they are above average in supporting traveling without a car. Most people believe they support traveling without a car more than everybody else. Now, that cannot be possible. It's not possible for 66% of people to be above average. So what this suggests is that there is a lot of support for traveling without a car, but people believe that they are on their own. People believe that they are unique in supporting non-car travel. They don't realize that other people support it. So there's a really positive message here that we know there is support for traveling without a car, but we know that people are hiding it. So we could use that information. We could be feeding people information to say it is normal to want more travel without a car. You are not on your own. Most people support traveling without a car. They just stay quiet about it because it's not normal to talk about. So that's the first interesting insight that came out of this work. The second, and this is a really complicated diagram, you're not meant to interpret all of it, but the point is, you can see there at the right, the main outcome, the main thing that we're measuring is this motor normativity, this tendency to show double standards to support driving. And this analysis confirmed that it is shaped by the environment, and it's shaped by the environment in more than one way. So the social environment, what your friends think, what your family think, what other people think, those all create this motor normativity tendency. But then separately, your physical environment is also shaping this motor normative tendency. Where you live, and which country you're in and whereabouts you live in the country, if you live in a city or whether you live in the countryside or in the suburbs, those things separately shape your view. So this was really nice support. This supported our theory that those environments, your social environment and your physical environment, they are shaping your perceptions of what is normal. And they are shaping this tendency to make special excuses for cars. So to wrap it up, we would suggest that motor normativity is a form of unconscious bias. It stops us making objective decisions. It makes people do special dispensation for driving, special consideration for driving that they wouldn't do if they made objective decisions. It stops public health efforts and it stops policymakers doing what they would do if they treated the situation objectively. We suggest that people need to start questioning their own decisions, especially decision makers and planners need to start auditing their decisions. And fundamentally, we've now got quite good evidence that this tendency to overlook the problems of driving and this tendency to give special consideration to the car is shaped by the environment, by the social environment, but also by the physical environment. The physical world of our streets is having an influence on this tendency. So we would argue that structural changes, actually rebuilding streets or changing the legal system, is going to have potentially very big effects in this domain. So thank you very much. I will leave it there. There's a link there to a very good video on this topic if anybody wants to watch that. So it was made by a cycling channel on YouTube who do an incredibly good description of the. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. There are many things here to unpack and discuss and continue to reflect upon as we move on to the discussion segment. And just before giving our panelist Ida Lemoine a moment to introduce herself, I'd just like to know if there's any need for any clarifying questions in the room, like something that was unclear or so.
I'm curious about the trends. Is it getting better or worse compared to for like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ago? Is going in the right direction or wrong direction?
Oh, sorry. I don't know. I think it's probably not changing, but we haven't measured this until 2 years ago. So we don't have good historical data. But I think it feels like it's probably been fairly constant.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So it's probably not a challenge that just will solve itself. So Ida, over to you. Would you like to join me standing? A place you find appropriate? And
yeah, I will not stand in front of you. I will stand here on the side of you then.
And can you see? Yeah, this is, as we told you, this smart video camera. So I think you see both of us now. Yeah. All right. And would you care to introduce yourself just briefly in your work?
Yeah, you said something there in the start. But yes, so my name is Ida and I'm leading a bureau called Beteendelabbet. And we've been working with behavioral change and applied behavioral science in various fields the last 10 years. And I think it's super interesting to listen to this presentation as well. So we've been lying within climate mitigation and adaptation, of course, but both in the housing sector, how do we build our environment, that we create more sustainable behaviors. We've been in the mobility sector, but even more lately we're looking into how can we transform and eat more healthy and climate-friendly food. So we are helping organizations basically to better get the insights from behavioral science and create interventions that lead us in the right direction. So we are very much within creating more sustainable behaviors. And I'm glad to be here. And I guess we'll see where the focus will shift, because at the time now we are part of an innovation platform. It's an initiative from Vinnova, the innovation agency of Sweden, where they're trying to transform the food system. So it's a way to work more mission-driven, to understand the ecosystem and how can we work with system change. And for me, being in the environmental field and behavioral change, that's a super interesting aspect. And I guess that's something that might be relevant here as well, is to understand where are you supposed to work within the system and how do you understand the system. And Ian here showed us some models and examples of it, and see how that you sort of lead the discussions and your questions.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a great, start, I think, for this discussion segment. So I prepared questions, and they are about how to change behaviors and working with, you said, like a mission-driven approach and all that. And yes, if anyone has any questions or follow-ups, please raise your hand, and we'll throw them into the discussion. And I mentioned in you too, that working with food habits, and we have this köttnormen word, the meat normativity, and both motornormativity and köttnormen are both deeply rooted societal norms. This is a question on volley, as we say in Swedish, but do you have any thoughts on how a similar statement about meat consumption could look like? So
I just love what you called me and asked if I wanted to be in panel, and you sort of asked if there would be any relevance, and I started to talk to you about what we did in the food system, and I was sort of in that discussion, we're like, oh, and I was saying stuff, and you were like, okay, that might be relevant to put on the ideas of what's happening with the car norms and the meat norm. Of course, so the question is that you really need to sort of look into the system as well. I think I'm sort of zooming out a bit how we are tackling this challenge, and the norm that is obviously there is a huge meat norm that we have in this country, and we have to make a shift, obviously, both for our health actually, but of course also for the climate, is that we ended up zooming in a little bit more on norms and behavioral change, but I really want to emphasize that we, at the beginning, you look at policy regulations, you look at the producers, of course, do we have the products there, and how do you look at distribution, how is it actually feasible and accessible to get all those different more sustainable and healthy options for us. So that's also that's why we have the name of the protein revolution, is the name of the platform that we work with. But we really zoomed in and looked into the segment of understanding the norms and the behaviors within this. How can we push the demand side? Not a very easy challenge to actually go into, but something that we were super interested in. And I don't know, in your initial questions as well, you sent over to me, is that how do you tackle this, and how do you sort of work and shift on reaching all this norm that we obviously need to change? And I normally say, and that's also when I'm out talking, is that how can we find this group of people that have the willingness to change? That's an interesting group to tackle, and we look a lot in when we want to transform the food system, is that how can we meet a critical threshold, tipping point. The social tipping point is something that is discussed a lot, and I don't know if that might be relevant to talk about social tipping points as well, when it comes to transforming the car norm into other transportation means. But we are really, Damon Santola is a sociologist from American sociologists, discussed this, is if you reach about 20% of the group, the rest will follow. You will find sitting on a chair, when you fall over, and you feel that the rest will follow. It's just an interesting idea that we want to play around with when we look into shifting people to more alternative other proteins. I don't know how long I will talk about it if you want to enter in more questions, but so what we're trying is that we look into this group of people that have the willingness to change. We understand them better. Where do we have different leverage points? And we've been doing a mapping at the time, so we're really trying to understand where do we begin if we want to shift the norm concerning the meat norm. And what we especially look into is how do we today, around 50% of all everyday meals is just 10 meals. So we're trying to go in on a very detailed level to understand this consumer group that has the eagerness to actually change, and that they also have the capability to change. But is that okay? What kind of meals are we supposed to work with? Where is the norm for new proteins that we might have a willingness to eat more of? For example, beans and so forth. I use the English word for that. It's also we have a very high willingness to eat this more. So everything is willing to have our understanding where you can put the same aspect into the transportation means. What kind of transportation means might we have a bigger willingness to actually adapt to? And that is leading the work for us. When we are trying to target the willingness and we're trying to target the meals that are most relevant to find some kind of leverage point and really make us to shift into new alternative proteins. And I guess concerning when you work with norms, you definitely need to understand what stands in the way and what kind of hinders, what barriers is out there. And that is also part of the mapping that we do in the system. What is sort of the hinder for me to actually moving from the meat to something new is taste, for example. And what we try is really challenging different kind of hinders and do experiments and test how our perception actually is about taste, for example. We're just going to stop there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll come back to you, but and you too. I just wanted to give you the word TUI, and if you have any comments, it's similar to, or for me at least, it sounds similar to the stuff you work with, but you discussed the structure changes needed, and this is like, okay, that's maybe the structures are very slow, at least the physical ones when it comes to transportation system, to change. So there are other ways, and you spoke about these 20% and all that. Do you have any comments or any thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, very quickly. I think Ida made some extremely important points there. And to be clear, we didn't invent the idea of multiple environments shaping behaviour. And in some ways, the food researchers were there first because people have talked about obesogenic environments for quite a long time. And you've got very similar processes going on. If it is socially normal to eat a bad diet, and it is easy to eat a bad diet, and it is hard to... A good example is the university I work in. You cannot buy healthy food in our university. There is no shop selling healthy food. So people eat bad food, and it's not only physically easy because of the physical retail environment, it's also socially easy because everybody else is doing the same thing. You've got a similar situation. There's multiple environments all telling you the same message: buy cheap food and eat unhealthily. And so the question becomes, if you're talking about the diet situation or you're talking about the transport situation, what's the best action? And the thing that I always come back to is how much time do any of us have? I'm quite old now. I don't have a lot of time. So I need to think, where am I going to use my time effectively? Am I going to have 7 billion conversations and try and persuade every individual person with individual behaviour change? Or shall I have one conversation with a prime minister and change the environment so that millions of people are affected at once? So I ultimately think that one of the best things we can be doing is making those environmental changes, shift the physical environment, shift the retail environment, shift the legislative environment, because then that is going to affect the behaviour of millions of people at the same time, rather than doing this very slow process of individual persuasion, which is going to fail, because I can go and tell everybody to walk more, or I can go and tell people to eat better diets, but in an environment where that is not possible, they can't do it anyway, even if I persuade them. So for me, the focus has got to be on shifting the environment to make the behaviours possible and easy, rather than ahead of persuading people to want to do them.
And just to be clear, this environment is not just physical environment, but all these different kinds of environments you spoke about. Thank you. Would you like? Yes, you had a question first, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think maybe for the both of you. So how can these social tipping points help to reach, because I think there are many low-hanging fruits both in the car and in the meat consumption discussion, so people you convince rather easily, but how are these tipping points helping us to convince the others to follow them?
Yeah, I guess start again, see if I can answer here and see how we can do the parallel to the transport sector as well. Is like it all comes to also where could you possibly have impact. So we're also looking into if we want to impact the decision concerning what we're eating and what we're buying, is that we look into the public meal, for example. I think it's just interesting because we have a lot of consumption happening there. And of course, a lot of things happening in private households as well. So the grocery store is also a very interesting place to work in, and we've been working a lot in that one. But I guess if you try to really have a mission-driven work when you are doing this and trying to get more people, for example, within the public meal, if you get more, it's happening already now. Schools are 100% vegetarian, so we are there. So if that's starting to be something we do regularly in our everyday life and we get more common with it, I would say so that what this theory means is that might lead the rest of the group following. So let's see if you have a whole class and 25% of that class is actually eating that and not making a discussion about it and actually likes it. And maybe the same sort of theory put on that, okay, 20% of the class now is taking the bike to school. That would generally lead the rest of the group of follow after, because that's sort of like a critical mass, critical group, or critical mass that you support to sort of helping the rest of them to tipping over. I don't know exactly where you find this point. I think sometimes also if you look into what kind of factors need to be active when a tipping point is supposed to happen. I think I'm not saying that electric car industry should be the right way, but if you look into Norway, for example, concerning the exponential happening there with electric cars, is definitely an example that's interesting to look into a bit. And there is a lot of different factors going on when they're doing that. I know they look into that there was some pop singers, AHA, that was driving a car through the city, the sort of behavioral influencers. You have the politicians, you have the civil society, a lot of things happening at the same time. And that sort of exponentially led to, what is it, about 89% cars sold this year in Norway with electric cars, comparing about 0 just a couple of years ago. So that's a little bit of like an exponential example. And the answer to that was a lot of factors was happening at the same time. That's what sort of led to this sort of tipping point as well. So I don't know if it gives, so the answer is not easy in that sense. Ian, maybe you have, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good answer. I'll add something slightly different, which is there's a place where we've been really bad at this in the past, which is we keep trying to learn from the very early adopters who are doing behaviors despite the environment. So a really good example is bicycle travel here in the UK. Around about 2% of people regularly travel by bicycle. And what we've had for years is government look at those 2% and say, right, what do you need? Why do you cycle? Let's do more of that. And in fact, the answer is no. People who cycle today are people like me. It's like healthy white men. That's who cycle today. Look at all the people who are excluded by today's system. You can't get them doing it because if it was easy for them to be doing it, they'd already be doing it. So let's not just try and learn lessons from the people like me who are prepared to fight the system. Let's change the system so that it works for everybody in a more inclusive way, rather than learn from the strange outliers who are prepared to do things when it's difficult.
Nice, thank you. We had another question here in the front row.
I had several questions, but one question I had maybe to both of you. Maybe first to Ian, if you were a planner or a politician, where would you start changing if you went into a city?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, really, they should make me prime minister. That would help a lot. I think there's two big things. The first is I think it's not about specific actions. I think it's about a change of vision. So what we need is politicians, leaders, to change the vision. So the question needs to start: how can people living here have a wonderful life without needing to drive? And if that was the starting question, then all of the other specific decisions become easier. I think Paris has been doing a very good job of this in the last few years under Jeanette Sadiq-Khan there. Right, I've just given the wrong mayor's name. Anne Hidalgo, sorry, the wrong exciting mayor. Anne Hidalgo has been doing an amazing job in Paris through the change in vision of how do we create a city where people can get around without cars and have a great life in Paris. And then once you've agreed that, once you've got that vision of uh, it should be easy to get around without a car, individual decisions. What should this street look like? What should this pedestrian crossing look like? Where should this car park go? All of the specific decisions become easier because you know that they align with the grand goal. So I think that's the number one thing that politicians and leaders need to do, and planners, is have the grand vision of what they're trying to accomplish and stop making small individual decisions, get the overarching goal arranged so that the individual decisions can always be made to align to it.
It relates a bit to this, what you were speaking about, the mission-driven approach. I assume like the vision and mission often are combined, and it's like in traffic engineering, forecasting future transportation demand has traditionally been the method of choice. And so it's a shift in mentality, I would suppose. So you had a question here.
My question to both of you is that we once, inside the Green Motorists, we had a speech from a historian who had studied the promotion of tobacco smoking and why it ceased so rapidly, at least in Sweden. And this was a quality study, and she found, or her finding was that when people understood the health risks for people around yourself, not your own health risk, but the risk exposure to the kids, etc. That was kind of tipping point mentally that led to a dramatic decrease in tobacco smoking in Sweden. So my question to you is, could that aspect be used both in changing meat behaviors and traffic behaviors, that we understand the risk for someone else than ourselves?
I'll start then again. Definitely concerning the discussion about health and what we eat needs to be emphasized a lot. And I think maybe the transportation section people are more aware, now I'm completely sure if I'm said like correct here, but that the pollution is impacting us, cars are impacting us, but from the side of transforming us to eat, that's even a recommendation coming out from Livsmedelsverket now, is actually emphasizing us to eat less red meat because it's not good for our health. So they are not discussing about the climate at all in that impact.
Yeah, I don't think telling people that they are hurting other people makes that much difference. You can try an experiment, go outside the building, find someone driving an SUV and tell them that they're causing danger or pollution. They're not going to go, oh, you're right, please get rid of my car for me. People driving big cars kind of know they're causing a problem. But even if that worked, even if I went to my neighbor here and said, your car is causing pollution, and they said, oh, God, yeah, you're right. I'd never thought of this before. They need to be able to act. It's one thing, and Ida will know all about this. You have to think of two dimensions. You have to be the wanting to act has to be high, but also being able to act has to be high as well. And at the moment, we don't really have a system where people can act. Even if I persuade my neighbour that they should get rid of their car because it's harmful to other people, there's no bus. There's no alternative to the car. So there also needs to be those structural changes to enable people to act if we can do the individual persuasion.
Another question from
Yeah, directly correlated to that, especially in Sweden, there are a lot of small communes where there is this necessity to have a car to move around because there are a few buses that don't go all the time and they don't go all the time everywhere. But it feels like a vicious cycle where you can't enable or make the commune to do the change and actually build the infrastructure. And you can't, like, even if they do the infrastructure, it's not going to be used because they're still going to use the car. So it feels like a vicious cycle. From what point can one, I don't see really a way to tackle the problem. Like, where should one start in this scenario?
Yeah, good question. I was thinking and like it as well when we said now that we can't really mimic the early adopters and we need to be like the prime minister of the country. So yeah, I think it's a good question. What can we do?
So I would say super important. If you don't have a car sharing pool, you're not going to share the car with your neighbors. It's very simple as that. So that's what I mean with the system talking is that if we don't have new alternative proteins that are good and delicious, we're not going to shift to them. So I see what you mean. So it's super important that all those different players are there because we're emphasizing that people are going to change their behavior, but obviously you must be a possibility to actually make it easy to do the right behavior. So definitely have to work on that.
Interesting. Ian, do you have any thoughts as well?
No, I think that was an excellent answer. I have nothing to add there.
I wanted to say thank you, of course, and it's been very inspiring hearing from you, Ian, and you, Ida, and thankful for the interesting questions as well, and comments and reflections. And it's become clear to me that we inherit a lot of undecided norms in the transportation system and society in general, but there are also, we have been shown, we have discussed that there are new, better norms that can be shaped, but it seems to take quite a substantial effort. So, all these tipping points, they need to happen at once, I picked up. So, this is a question I leave you with, and that is, what can you do to challenge these norms that hold us back from a sustainable future? And with that, I say thank you very much.